And welcome back to another episode of TWiP Weddings. Once again, I'm one of your co-hosts, Bruce Clark, and joining me this week, we're just the two Mouseketeers, Mr. Robert Evans.
Good morning.
Good morning. So Mr. Caparici is, I don't know, we can make up some rumor about where he is, but let's say he's out on a tractor planting seeds to sprout something new.
Right.
So Brian isn't joining us this week, so it's just you'll have to put up with just me and Robert this week. So how are things in your world?
Very good. Just got home from my marathon trip. I saw you and Brian at WPPI, and that was the beginning of it. I was gone 17 days and just got home Monday evening, just in order to be home for 2 days to leave on Thursday morning for a destination wedding.
Crazy schedule. Yeah, I was back from WPPI myself, and yeah, just getting ready. Wedding season's going to start up here fairly soon, and got some engagement shoots coming up. So that's kind of what's new in my world. But I want to give a shout out before we kind of get into the show. I want to give a little shout out. So our friends Andy Buscemi and Neil Urban gave us a little shout out, and I wanted to return the favor and thank them for listening to TWiP Weddings. They've actually launched a new podcast as well. So if you like consuming podcasts, Andy and Neil also have one called Wedding Photographers Unite, and so they came across our podcast and were kind enough to send us an email and acknowledge that we've got a new podcast out. So if you want to give them a listen, they're over at weddingphotographersunite.com. So more podcasting goodness. Seems like all the cool kids are doing it now, Robert. We're all doing it. Awesome. Well, welcome back to the show. As always, we want to remind you, before we kind of get into today's topic, which is going to be a continuation from last week's show, we want to remind you kind of how you can get in touch with us. So, of course, the best way, if you head on over to our website at thisweekinphoto.com/weddings, you'll find links to all the past episodes. You can also subscribe to the show on iTunes. If you want to email us, you can email us at twipwed@thisweekinphoto.com, or follow us on Instagram at twipwed, and post on social media, use the hashtag twipwed. And so I mentioned that this week is going to be a continuation of our discussion that we had a couple weeks ago, which was on sort of the wedding day walkthrough. And this is part 2 of that discussion, so we're going to get into that in a little bit. But before we do, of course, we want to start with our usual segments that we have, and our first is our Picks of the Week. In our Picks of the Week segment, each week we're going to share a photography-related item that we think would be a benefit for other wedding photographers to check out. So, Mr. Evans, what have you got for us this week?
So my pick of the week is Capture One software, which basically is a raw image processor by Capture One, or Phase One. A lot of people know them as that. And I actually did a demo with them at WPPI, and it was a tethering demo, specifically showing how Sony cameras tether right into it. But then became aware that it's much like Lightroom, or better in my opinion. That's why it's my pick of the week. And I kind of dug into it a little bit, and I was like, wow, I really liked the color management in it a little bit better. Seemed a little bit quicker. And again, for Sony users, Sony camera users, as you guys know, I'm a Sony artisan and a Sony fan. And you can actually get the pro version of this for $30, which is normally $300. So for those of you who shoot Sony, it's a really great value. There is an express version, I believe, that anybody can download that's actually free. And it just has a few less tools in it than the pro version does. But if you want to check it out and just see what the interface looks like or any of that, I would just go to Capture One and download that bad boy.
Very cool. I was going to check it out. I heard a lot of buzz about it at WPPI. A lot of people seem to be talking about Capture One. I'm hearing more and more about Capture One. So I'm curious to kind of check it out and see. It's always one of those struggles, like, do you want to introduce something new into your workflow and have to another piece of software, to learn? But if there's efficiencies you can gain by it, it's definitely something.
Yeah, I thought it was a little quicker. The functionalities, of course, you can do all the same things But I really like the way the color management was. There's kind of like a wheel so that you can drag the color around. There's some great skin tone adjustments, and just a few other things. And I've barely scratched the surface myself, I'm sure, on what it can do. So I'm continuing to play with it, but I'm really liking it.
Nice. Yeah, I know a lot of people have also been talking about it, I think, too, because they're looking for alternatives to Aperture. Of course, with Apple kind of closing the door on Aperture and moving into their Photos app, there's a lot of people, a lot of photographers that were using Aperture, and they're looking, they're kind of the nomads wandering the desert, wondering where should we go next, and looking for another solution. So really, Lightroom was kind of the only one. But so it's good to know that Capture One is a good alternative. How is it with the tethering? One of the issues I use tethering sometimes when I'm shooting in studio, and one of the issues I find with Lightroom is if something becomes unplugged, or I'm always constantly having to like restart. When I'm doing tethered capture. What was your experience using the tethered?
It was great. I mean, I basically the demonstration that we did in the Sony booth. I took pictures of a model and tethered them right. They went up on the screen so people could see them, and then he said, so for the tethering part is smooth. I mean, you just take pictures and boom, they show up. So that part of it was great. I know they do the tethering tools that you can get. They do make little clips that doesn't pull out of the camera and things like that if you were having that issue. But I don't tether, but I could see like for those that did. I mean, you can of course, fire and focus the camera and do all sorts of things right from your laptop. They also have an app. I forget that goes with it. I'm sure you can find it on the site. I'm just escaping me the name of it right now. That's free. But let's say you wanted those images. You're doing a commercial shoot, and you wanted those images to go to like an iPad so that your client could sit there and look at them, and that does that as well.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I'm kind of holding out for Lightroom 6, which is I heard coming out later this month, and I heard there's going to be some speed improvements in it, which is good. So hopefully that's coming down
Yeah.
the pipe really soon as well. So all kinds of good stuff out there for photographers to check out. Well, my pick of the week this week kind of has to do with our wedding day workflow, because we talked about kind of what gear we bring with us and to a typical wedding day. And so I want to make my pick of the week the bag that I carry with me. So for the first few years, I used to carry, well, I still do, but I carry too much gear. And I used to bring a backpack. I had a low pro backpack, which was great for carrying all my gear, but I found it wasn't terribly convenient on the wedding day as far as like getting into the bag and getting, if I had to pull a lens out or something like that, a backpack just wasn't convenient at all.
Right.
So I searched and searched and searched for a bag that was going to work really well for me. And if you're watching the video, I'm going to share my screen so you can see that I'm going to go to Lowpro's website. And this is the bag that I'm using. It's called the Nova 200 AW, and it is basically like a shoulder bag with a top flap that opens up. And I can carry about 6 lenses in this bag. So usually my typical setup is that I'll have two bodies on me, and there's a little video here, not video, but another picture. You can see kind of the inside of the bag if you're watching the video. If not, just head on over. I'll put a link in the show notes to this, and you can check it out. But I usually, carry 2 bodies on me on my holdfast straps, and then I'll carry this bag with me. And I find this is pretty much all I need with me for most of the wedding day. I can pack, flashes in here. I can pack my lenses. I can pack, any extra memory cards, batteries, all that kind of stuff that I need with me, and it all fits in this bag, and it's not too heavy. The thing I like about that top opening bag is that, it's really easy. I can pop it down or set it down somewhere, open the top up, and get at anything that I need to get at really easily.
That's a really good price.
Yeah, it's like $165. I think I might have even got it on sale one day or something like that. So it's not too expensive. And I found the Low Pro bags, just their build quality is really, really good. And they're really good about, if anything, I think they have a lifetime guarantee on stuff. So if anything, like a buckle breaks or zipper breaks, something like that, they'll replace it. I had buckles break on my backpack, and I just contacted them, and they shipped me out like a new buckle right away. So I found the Low Pro bags really, really good. So that's my pick. What do you use for a bag?
I have my 2 main bags right now are Tamarack bags. I switched to those a little while ago because the same thing. I was sort of looking for something to fit my needs. I had a a roller bag. I had a Think Tank before, which I loved. It was a great bag. And then the Tamarack bag's just a, I travel so much. I need a roller bag that fits in the overhead. And the Tamarack bag was just a little bit smaller and fit a little bit better, not quite as deep as the Think Tank. But I really like, I mean, they're both comparable bags, but I really like the Tamarack bag. And the second one that I really like is a shoulder bag like that. But then it had a slot right in the front of it for my laptop, which is really cool. So it's like basically looks like a traditional Tamarack bag that you think, shoulder bag, but then now they have a slot in the front for the laptop, which I really like. So I'm really taking a lot of gear. Then I have both those bags, and those both can still come on the plane with me, and go into the overhead. They get a little heavy walking through the airport, but that's nice with the roller bag as I put the other one on top of that. The Tamarack bag has a slot where you can slide it over the handle and it doesn't fall off. So
Yeah, you do a lot of destination stuff, so you have to make sure that you've got stuff that works well to travel and get on the airplanes.
I have to be mobile, and it has to be accessible, like you said. So those both work really well for me.
Yeah, awesome. We could probably have a whole show on bags. It's the bag. We'll do the bag show, the bag episode. Because I'm always looking at bags and looking at different things, and I probably have a closet full of bags that I don't know, either I thought would work and then used for a while and then realized it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
They need like a bag rental service where you could like rent bags to try them.
Yeah.
Before you buy them, a try before you buy bag rental service. Somebody do that. Somebody get on that.
Well, you think that each manufacturer might have like a little, way to do that.
Yeah. So Low Pro or Tamarack or any of those guys, if you're listening, this is our idea. We'll patent it. All right. So some good picks. Again, we'll have links to those in the show notes. So next we've got our listener question, and each week we're going to choose a listener question to answer on the show. So this week the question is from Keely. And this kind of fits in where we're going today. And Keely asks, she's looking for some tips for getting natural smiles. She's got a couple for a wedding that's coming up, and they just informed her that they want 90% of the photos of them looking at the camera or each other and smiling, which is kind of opposite of her style. So she's looking for some tips and some advice to kind of get some natural-looking expressions and smiles from her couples. Robert, what would you say to Keely?
Well, and this can obviously segue into, like you said, what we're going to talk about today. I guess just be yourself. I mean, I remember when I was training to be a wedding photographer back in the day, and one of the guys that I trained with, I mean, this guy like would say, "All right, everybody, on three, say pizza." And
Was that Moses?
Moses, right?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, going, "Oh my gosh, that's so not me. I cannot do that. How am I going to do this job?" He even had a little like squeaky rubber chicken in his bag that he busted out and put on top of the lens, and I was like, this guy's a dork. And I was like, I cannot do that. And I guess I just developed my own style. But one of the things that I get a lot of comments on from people, and I do it naturally, and it's nothing that I've ever thought about it, but when I'm behind the camera and I'm looking at them and I want them to smile, especially for family portraits, I smile at them. I'm like, hey, you guys look over here. And I have a big smile on my face and I smile at them. And people have commented many times saying that, well, it's so hard not to smile because you're smiling, So that's kind of something that I've heard. You can, I think, try to be a little bit funny if it's your personality, but appropriate. I think, I've heard some inappropriate things said from other photographers over the years and stories and things like that. But, be appropriate. And the other thing that I use, especially when I'm doing, well, it doesn't whether they're smaller groups or big groups, but it especially works well if you're just doing like your bridesmaids, your ones and twos, maybe 3-4 people at the most. I will take that formal photo, say, all right, everyone, line them up, make sure they look good, take that picture, and then I'm like, hey, you guys, put your arms around each other, give each other a little hug. Especially with two girls or mom and daughter, bride and dad, I say give each other just a little hug, and people hug and they smile. You don't have to say anything. You just have to watch for it and take the photo. You don't even have to count. You don't have to go, all right, on 3, everyone smile. I'll just say, all right, I'll take a couple of the traditional photos, I guess, if you will, and then I'll say, all right, you guys, give each other a little hug. Just look right here and give each other a hug. And I make sure that it's spontaneous, and they give each other a hug, and people smile, and I take the picture. So those are kind of my techniques of how I get it done.
Those are some good tips. I like those. Yeah, for us, I think it's getting to know your couple is so key, and the engage. I think that for us starts. I mean, it starts when we first meet with the couple, right? And taking
Right.
time to learn about them and who they are, and you know, we're always listening and trying to pick up on things that they're interested in and things that they like, so that when we're in that moment and shooting with them, we can maybe bring up a funny story or something that we heard. I'm always very carefully listening, particularly in the mornings when the girls are all getting ready. I'm listening for funny things that might happen or little inside jokes and things. I try to pick up on those and then find ways to maybe pull those out and use them. And then I find it evokes kind of a natural laugh from them, or
Right.
kind of a natural reaction. But I think the engagement session is a great kind of place to build that rapport with your couple, get them comfortable with you. And then I think once they've gone through and they've seen the images, a lot of times I'll point out the ones that were our favorites, and usually they're the ones where they're not like looking at the camera. It's usually the ones where they're connected with each other and doing something with each other, and not the like forced looking, I'm looking at the camera ones. I mean, there's always going to be a few of those, but those typically aren't, those are the ones mom and dad likes, but those aren't the ones that are typically our favorites, and usually they're not the ones that are our couple's favorites either. So those are, I guess it all starts kind of building that rapport early on, in the engagement session. But even earlier than that, during your initial consultation, is get to know your couple, know what they're like. You mentioned kind of inappropriate or appropriate. You have to be able to read your couple a little bit as well,
Super
and kind
important.
of be a little bit of a chameleon, a little bit sort of blend in with them. So if they're a little more low key, you don't want to be like super high energy, but if they're super high energy, sometimes you have to kind of match their energy level as well. I find that helps, just to make them feel more comfortable and relaxed. Because if they're really low key and low energy, and you come in there like, "Hey, everybody, let's go," and sometimes it can be off-putting and it makes them feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And it can go the other way too. If they're fun and gregarious and having a good time, and you're really shy and quiet, sometimes that can also make them feel kind of uncomfortable, and then that translates into the photos. So I like your advice of smile, all right, and the
Yeah.
camera looks two ways.
You're right. You have to adjust your personality because my personality, actually, quite honestly, is I'm very shy, and especially in the beginning when I started shooting weddings, and I was having those thoughts like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this job? I remember just being petrified. One of the first things I started doing, to even start taking pictures at a wedding, and again, remember that I was shooting Hasselblad in medium format, on a bracket, and as the photographer would hand me his camera and say, all right, now I want you to, during dance photos when they're slow dancing, he's like, I want you to go up and, touch their hands, then, go, hey guys, look over here, and back up, 3 feet, because the lens was pre-focused, and take a picture. And I remember that just petrifying me, that I had to even go touch their hands or bother them while they were doing that. But I had to learn. You have to learn to do that, and you have to get out of your comfort zone. And I think and just take charge. But you can still be yourself. And if you are kind of a more quiet, shy person, it's okay to come out of your skin a little bit. But I think don't be obnoxious. That's the worst thing I see. Like I've been at other venues, where there's multiple photographers, and I'm watching them work, and I'm just shaking my head going, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're doing that, or saying that, or, I think just, it's always best to err on the side of, caution, I guess, if you will. You can be funny if you're naturally funny, but, watch your audience and see how they're reacting to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll find too that you'll attract, and probably that's the type of client that if you're that kind of personality. Like I have some friends who are photographers who are they're very outgoing. They can be a little inappropriate sometimes. They're very gregarious, and that tends to be the types of couples that they attract. And that's
Right.
fine because they're a good match, right?
Right.
Whereas we're a little quieter, maybe a little more low key, and that tends to be the type of couple that we attract. So you kind of like attracts like, right? And I think that goes,
Right. Yeah. I've
with
always said
everything.
I believe that I'm photographing the couples who I should be working with.
Yeah, absolutely. So awesome. Some great advice, and hopefully that helps Keely out. So I want to get into our main discussion this week, and again, if you go back and listen to episode 9, that was our for sort of part one of this discussion, and it was a wedding day walkthrough. And I think we bit off a little more than we could chew that episode. Hey, like we thought, oh yeah, we can cover a wedding day in one episode, and yeah, that didn't happen. So
Yeah.
we're we decided to break this up into two episodes. And so in the last episode, we kind of walked through how we approach a typical wedding day, and we started kind of looking at the morning, the girls and guys getting ready, how we all approach it, what kind of gear we bring. And then we talked a bit about first looks, which is, Robert, you do more first looks, I think, than myself and Brian. But we talked about kind of the first looks and how that plays into the timeline of the day. And then we got into the ceremony and talked about family photos, and I think that's kind of where we left things off in
Right.
the last episode. So this week, what we wanted to do was kind of pick up that conversation. And unfortunately, Brian couldn't join us this week, so we're gonna Robert and I are gonna kind of bounce back and forth and share kind of how we approach the rest of the wedding day, kind of picking up after the family photos. So what
Did we cover ceremony? We talked a little bit about ceremony last time.
Yeah, we talked about ceremony, and we gave some good tips and some good advice. One of the tips that you gave in the last episode, which I thought it's worth bringing up again, was during ceremonies. I found it interesting. You'll often task your second shooter with being the one that shoots like the processional, and you hang out at the back of the church with the bride and catch some of those moments between her and maybe her parents.
I think part of being a really great photographer is sort of anticipating the moment. And there's a lot of moments that are happening behind the scenes right before a bride walks down. So just to sort of recap, like I would say the last 20 or 30 minutes before she actually walks down the aisle, I just sort of hang out with the girls in the room or wherever they are, and then, follow them up to getting lined up and all those things. So whether it's bride and her dad, whoever's walking her down the aisle, there's a lot of really, really great moments, and I've taken some amazing images just by hanging out back there. Because my philosophy is like, then, when you take those pictures of them coming down the aisle, of course the picture of the bride from the front is important. But a lot of the other stuff, and especially in today's world, don't end up in the album for those that are doing albums, and because they're trying to save money and cut down. But and they're just hit and miss, like whether you get a good shot or not, whether those bridesmaids are looking at you. So I tell my second shooters, I'm like, for sure I want a great picture of the bride and dad or whoever's walking her. I want the kids and the grandparents. And if the bridal party comes fast and furious, like, do your best, but don't stress out about it.
Yeah.
But those moments that you get, behind the scenes. So with that said, you need to really have a second shooter that you're confident in, that you can put in front of the church or the aisle and get those great images.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. So we talked about family. Kind of the last episode, we ended off just talking about family photos. So I think we were all pretty much the same in that, like, you'll do family photos, and Brian, I think, was the same quite often at the venue where the ceremony is, for the most part. We try to do that as well, or at least pick a location that's fairly close by, so there's, people don't have to travel a lot, because inevitably somebody will get lost on the way, and that just leads to more delays. So for you, I know you do a lot of first looks, so you tend to do a lot of the portrait session with the bride and the groom and the wedding party before the ceremony. What's it look like for you when you're not doing that? Or even, I want to dig into that a little bit more, because I think there's some things we could talk about in terms of, working with the bridal party, working with the bride and groom. What about if you're going to multiple locations? Kind of what's that look like? Either if you do it before the ceremony or after the ceremony. I think kind of that formal portrait session. How do you approach it? What gear do you bring with you, and how do you approach it in terms of like locations and those aspects?
I try to do obviously what makes most sense. Especially on a wedding day. Work smarter, not harder. So even if my couple, let's say, is willing to see each other before, and I can do all the pictures ahead of time, but for whatever reason, this is a kind of a common one. Even though my couples will see each other, sometimes they don't want to ask the extended family to be there before, because if everything's in one location, I'll get it all done before. I mean, I'm talking, first look, bride and groom portraits, immediate family, bridal party, and then extended family. And then ideally we're done, because again, the purpose of that, as I tell my couples, is when you kiss and say I do and walk down the aisle, you're done, and in your mind you're done, and in your mind, like, they all want to go party and be with their friends. So if they can just walk down the aisle and go do whatever they want and join their cocktail hour, then I think that's a win-win for everyone. It allows me as the photographer to get in the room and shoot details and those things with a little less rushed. Um, so um, I do that, and then but if they don't see each other before, like again, I do kind of what makes the most sense, and I will, let's say I have to do the family portraits after the ceremony. I'll try to keep it. Uh, I'll try to keep it to just the extended family. And let me back up a little bit. If my couples don't want to see each other, I will accomplish before the ceremony bride by herself, her immediate family, her bridal party, groom by himself, his immediate family, bridal party. So after the ceremony, then I'm left with those extended family photos as well as the couple together. So the extended family photos after, if you're at a church or someplace, I of course educated them and say, make sure that, even I talk to the bridal party and things like that before and say, all right, we're going to do pictures right afterwards. Don't take off. Don't go get a drink. Just get it done. And then I like to work big to small, meaning I'll start with my largest group. So I'll say, all the bride's family, come on up. And so it's the bride and groom, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins,
Yeah, we did like peel it like an onion, right? Start.
everyone, right? And
Yeah.
do that big picture, and then break that down to the immediate family, break that down to the parents, move the parents to one side of the bride, let's say her parents, ask the other groom's parents to come up, take that photo, and then uh, excuse excuse her parents. Then separate the groom's parents, put them on one side of either the bride and groom, and then I'll have his whole extended family come up. I'll take that picture, immediate family, mom and dad, maybe any grandparents if there's special pictures that they want. Now, the one thing that I do here too, again, talking about a second shooter that's helpful if you have a second shooter that you trust and is capable. In these big formal situations, I rarely take the pictures myself. I have my second shooter do it, and I direct the whole thing. So I'm the one placing the people in and out, inviting the people in and up and down, helping grandma to the altar, all those things, being pleasant and polite, and doing it in a very forceful is not the right way, but I take command,
Mm-hmm.
but I am gentle with everyone. So, you're not yelling and screaming at them. But the nice thing about doing it this way is that it really flows very quickly because as you can all relate if you're the photographer standing behind the camera and trying to pose everyone and dealing with these big groups of people. And I take little precautions, like let's say we're in a church, I'll ask everyone, please sit in the pews. I will call you up as I need you. I ask them to not stand behind me in the aisle while I'm doing it because nothing drives me crazy if someone's like, I have a bunch of people, whether they're taking pictures or not. Sometimes they're just standing there talking and I'm trying to back up and I'm bumping into people and like I'm a pretty chill person, but that gets the hair raised on my neck a little bit when people do that. So I have to, if it happens, I'm like, could you guys just please sit? I just
Yeah.
always smile the whole time. And
If you set up something like a light or a camera on a tripod, it's like a black hole and it sucks people
right, they
towards.
just want to stand right there. So my tips with that part of it, especially the bigger groups, is work large to small. It makes more sense than taking people up and down. I try to keep those photos also for each side of the family really, unless they want a bunch of breakdowns, to 3 shots. And that's the extended family, so that's everyone. The immediate family, so the bride and groom, the parents, brothers and sisters, spouses and kids, and then the bride's parents. So for her side, there's just 3 pictures, and it includes everyone. And you're done. Of course, if you have divorces, then you have to kind of, break that out a little bit more. And if they have requests, like they want special aunts, uncles, whatever, special photos of them. And this is also the time that I suggest to my couples that they invite any special friends that they want in the photos in this session. Meaning if they have godparents, sorority sisters, things like that. And I suggest that they invite them to this hour so that we get it done and you don't have to chase because oftentimes they'll say, oh well, we'll get that at the reception. We'll just get my sorority sisters later at the reception. And as you guys know, it's a pain in the ass to chase people around the reception and
Yeah, it's like herding cats.
together. And they're all having a good time. So I suggest that we do it then. And then the other thing that the way I sell this when I suggest that, as I said, also what it does for me is now I have a visual record of who's important to you, beyond your family, sorority sisters, godparents. So I will make sure that I, concentrate on those people during the reception, maybe more than I would have because I didn't know that was your godparents right there. Or maybe I see you dancing with your sorority sisters on the dance floor, and I get an amazing candid, and you might love that candid more than the formal one that I took, but at least I knew to take it because I knew those were all your sorority sisters.
Yeah, that's actually a really good tip because I've had it too where, they'll say, oh yeah, we'll get that later at the reception, and then it's, you're say, okay, well, it's 10 o'clock, we're packing up, we're getting ready. Oh yeah, we want to get that shot or this shot, and then, then they're spending 15 minutes again trying to herd cats and round everybody up, and the next thing you know, it's 10:30, and they're still trying to get everybody together for this photo, and half of them are plastered and ties around their heads, and it's just
Right.
not. It's a fun candid photo.
I mean, the idea, and I try to sell this each time, again with couples seeing each other, but like I alluded to or mentioned earlier, is like when you go to your reception, I want you to go to your reception and you don't have to do anything else. We will be there to capture everything that happens, but we don't have any more group photos to do. I don't have to arrange groups. I don't have to pull you away from your party and having fun. That's the idea, is you walk into your party and you enjoy the rest of the night and we capture what happens.
Nice, nice. So how about the actual portrait session itself? I know you talked a little bit about how you approach it when you're doing the first look before the wedding. What's it look like if you're doing it, or even doesn't even have to be after or before, but just the portrait session in general, working with the bridal party and with the bride and groom? How do you kind of approach that? Do you like to shoot? Because I know for us, we like to do the bridal party and everything first, and then kind of release the bridal party so they can either go back to the limo or go to a bar somewhere or something. Because I find a lot of times when the bridal party is all around, the couple sometimes aren't themselves, particularly if they're all hanging around while we're doing photos. So I usually like to do the bridal party photos first and then send them on their way and then just have the bride and groom to ourselves. Is that...
Correct. I mean, when you're doing family groups, going back to what we just talked about, I tend to do the family first just because, your parents are paying for it. They also want to get to cocktails and they have guests to greet. So I see it as the bridal party's a little bit more tolerable and they're their friends and they're going to hang out. But so I will generally do the family first. But again, if someone's missing the family's night there and I have all my bridal party, boom, let's get stuff done. Like I just want to get pictures taken so that it's one less photo that I have to do. But you're right. Like once I'm done with groups, I excuse everyone. I just want my couple, and I just want their attention. I don't want a bunch of people standing around because you're right. They're distracted. They're not, sort of enjoying each other. And I think they like that reprieve. There's like taking family photos can be stressful, and you see it on the faces of couples. And once you're kind of done with that whole process and and people leave and the decibels drop and it's quiet and you go for a walk maybe around the property or wherever you are, I think couples really, really enjoy that just kind of quiet time. If they haven't seen each other before, of course you're a little bit under the gun because generally you have about an hour during cocktail. So if family photos take a half an hour, which is great if you can get it done in that time, and then I have a half an hour for the couple. So I'm trying to get, of course, as much accomplished in that half an hour as I can. If the ceremony runs 15 minutes late, a lot of times they'll cut cocktails, and now I have 45 minutes to do all that, whereas before I had an hour, which is, again, one of my tools, I guess, that I use to help talk my couples into seeing each other before and having, a complete hour ahead of time to do photos, by themselves without anybody else around. So it's quiet and enjoyable. But again, however they want to do it, I respect that. So I enjoy my couples, just alone and by myself.
Do you find an hour is that kind of your ideal kind of time frame to have alone with the couple? Do you like to have more time than that, less time, or is an hour kind of your
I
sweet
think an
spot?
hour is good. If I have, again, going back to if they do a first look and they see each other, I run on a 3-hour time schedule prior to ceremony. So if you have a 6 o'clock ceremony, First look would be at 3. I'd photograph my couple from 3 to 4 by themselves. 4 to 5, I allow for immediate family bridal party, and from 5 to 6, any extended family, those extended family portraits. Now, a lot of times I finish before, and that sort of is my goal. I don't really want to run right up to 6 o'clock if the ceremony is at 6. And then if they do that, and I do get my couple for an hour before, and I will suggest to them too, like I like to call it bride and groom bonus time. So the couple kisses says I do walks down the aisle. If you're in a location like outdoors or a beach or someplace where they can actually take a walk, you're not necessarily just at a church where they can walk down the aisle and kind of take a walk. I suggest that they go do that and just keep going, and then I'll follow them with a long lens and just sort of photograph them, enjoying each other, but not get in their space.
Yeah.
And then, I'll say, look, we can take 10 minutes, do a couple quick pictures. Maybe there's a sunset, maybe. And then I'm like, go to cocktails. Go enjoy your guests. Be a part of your cocktail hour. Like, I want them to be at cocktails.
Yeah, I know here the wedding schedules here tend to follow a bit of a different pattern in that oftentimes the ceremonies are early, like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they're not at the reception until say 5:30 or 6 o'clock. So you've got this big gap of about 3 or 4 hours sometimes, which is it's actually it can be a blessing and a curse. So I mean it's nice to have that amount of time, but I find sometimes it can be too much time. Like there's this big gap of like what do you do in this time? So sometimes we'll actually encourage our couples to plan an activity maybe with their wedding party, like let's go for lunch, or go to your favorite watering hole, and we'll get some candids of them while they're there. So hopefully they picked a fairly nice place, and we'll get some candids of them just hanging out with their with their bridal party. The bridal party really appreciates it because the last thing they want to do is sit around for 3 hours and do photos. The groom usually really appreciates it because the last thing he typically wants to do is sit around for 3 hours and do photos. So we usually encourage them to plan some kind of an activity, and then we'll just follow them to that and break it up a little bit. So it's sort of like we'll do some photos, take a little bit of a break, and then maybe after the break, the wedding party can hang out or stay at that location, and we'll just take the bride and groom and do some more photos with them. I find about an hour and a half with the bride and groom is usually really good. I know early on in our wedding business, I concerned myself and spent too much time with the wedding party.
Right.
And I think I learned very quickly that as long as you get a couple of good shots of the whole bridal party, that's typically all the bride and groom really wants, and they end up putting one, maybe two of those shots in their album anyway.
Right.
So I started to kind of cut back on the amount of time that we spent focused on the wedding party with the couple, and divert that time more to the bride and groom. But I was always worried about missing something, right?
Right. Well, if you're gonna do, like going to that, like, so you do kind of a formal, pretty one, and then you have a fun one, and if you have those, then I think you're good. And my philosophy with family portraits and those bigger group shots, as well, has always been, look, they don't need to be creative. They need to be lit well and in focus. And if you have those two elements, and of course people looking pleasant in the pictures, that's all the couple wants. Sometimes, and people are going to disagree with this, but sometimes, you can get creative with your bridal party shots, and that is, and I've done it too, but I mean, for the more majority than not, I think it's more like it usually applies to that. Like, I just make sure that I get a nice shot of the bridal party. Maybe we have a fun one, but they're in focus and they're lit well, and the one thing that just is like a quick tip, I know this seems like common sense, but I've seen it a lot. Especially maybe to newer photographers, and people like to shoot prime lenses and wide open, but you really need to make sure that your aperture is like 5.6 or f8 when you're doing big group shots, because people in the back are going to be out of focus if you're focusing on the front. So it's funny, it seems like common sense, but I've seen many examples of it, and so it's just kind of one of those. Just make sure that everyone's in focus from front to back.
Yeah, I know during family photos for sure we bust out our lighting, so we bring our off-camera flash, usually set up a couple of lights with umbrellas, and we light that. Again, a lot of times we're shooting those in the church where the lighting it kind of stinks, so we need to light it. So I'll usually pull out the lights during the family session for sure. So this is kind of a little bit of a sidetrack, but something that I noticed was a bit of a growing trend, maybe not so much here, but day after sessions
Yeah.
with just the bride and groom. Is that something that you see a lot of, or do you do a fair amount of that? I noticed at WPPI, particularly I sat in on print judging, and I actually sat in on a category that was specifically dedicated to day after sessions, a lot of it coming from Asia. And they were, because in Asia, it seems like the wedding is kind of the parents' deal. So the parents are involved in the planning of it, but it's not really the couple's I guess, vision of how they want their wedding. So they're quite commonly now doing these day after sessions where they'll go sometimes to a really beautiful exotic location at like the best time of day for light, and then do a whole separate session, just the bride and groom. Is that something you're seeing, a trend you're seeing?
I've done it a few times. Like if I do it, it tends to be more at a destination wedding, where I'm there for the whole weekend, and then the couple will say, "Oh, we'll put the dress back on." But I've had those scheduled a couple times on destination weddings, and then had them canceled because the couples just the next day they're just tired, and they're like, "What? We have to get back in our dress and back in it, and
Yeah.
they have all these great intentions and think it sounds like fun, and then they don't want to do it. Um, because it's just so much work to have hair and makeup done again, get back in the dress. So I haven't done a ton of them myself.
Yeah, we haven't either. It's not a big thing, but I noticed it at WPPI, and it might have been just because that's the print judging that I sat in on. But I talked to some of those photographers, and they said they're getting these clients that are paying 15, 20, $30,000 in some cases to do these like portrait sessions, but they'll go like to some just amazing, beautiful locations with like the best light, the best time of day, and I was like, oh,
Right, right. Yeah, I mean that's sort of like just like doing a fashion shoot, and it's a little bit more of a controlled environment, and the results should be better because you're not under like a time constraint. And you said if you're choosing the, amazing locations and beautiful light, that's the thing sometimes with doing weddings, I guess how they are here. Um, we're a victim to, I guess, so to speak, look what we're given, and we have to make any given situation look great.
yeah, and that's where sometimes like sites like Pinterest and that can be dangerous, where you have brides coming in and say, "Oh, I want my day to look like this," and they're not realizing that 90% of those are these types of styled shoots that were on a they weren't constrained by a wedding day timeline, and they were so sometimes that's a
Right.
blessing and a curse. These things with social media sometimes, right? You don't see that. So okay, so that's kind of the bride and groom, in the bridal party portraits. So cocktail hour and the reception. How do you approach that? And what? Let's start with just gear wise. Do you bring or do anything different for the reception part or for cocktail hour than you would for say the rest of the day?
Not really. I might, because I shoot Sony cameras, I have several different ones. One of the things that I do at the cocktail hour, especially when I'm outside, and I love to do, is I do cocktail candid, what I call like headshots. So I'll walk around with a long lens and a 70 to 200 basically, and I'll single people out and try to capture them, just in a great moment. To me,
I think you muted yourself there, Robert.
now
There you go. We're
I
back.
went to move the microphone and I hit the mute button. Um, so I'll walk around the cocktail hour with a 70 to 200 and just single people out and take like candid headshots of them, smiling, laughing. I want to catch them pleasant, catch them in sort of an organic state, if you will. And I get quite a few compliments from my brides, or comments anyway, saying, "Oh my gosh, I love these pictures that you took of," they don't necessarily know it's cocktail hour, but they recognize that because I'm just capturing their friends, and singling them out and catching a good shot of them. The trick to doing this is, well, A, just to do it, but B, to keep moving. Don't get caught up in trying to catch one person too long. I just keep myself moving. So sometimes you'll see someone smiling, you'll be shooting through the crowd, and then now they're not smiling, and you're like, oh, I want that picture, and you're like standing there, and then they notice you. So the trick is not to get them to notice you. It's just keep going. You can come back to them, um, and that works really well. I mean, I have a lot of brides that really, really like that. And I know one of the things that in our previous show where we talked about the 50 things brides wish that their photographers would have done better, that was one of the common threads, was that there weren't enough candids of their guests. So I take this opportunity to try to get that, and then especially it works best when you have an outdoor location. Sometimes it's a little harder inside a room when you have to use flash on a 70-200 because you can get red eye with that long lens doing it that way. And then of course I'll have my second photographers do group shots, pose 3 or 4 people. Hey, you guys get together, let me get a quick picture. We just kind of keep that light and fun throughout cocktail hour. And then, of course, we'll also utilize cocktail hour as the time to, shoot detail. So maybe I'll do a little bit of that, and then I'll go in the room and I'll shoot detail. But that's, as far as cocktail hour goes, I don't have any other tips and tricks. But that one, brides and grooms seem to really like.
Yeah. Bride and groom usually present at the cocktail hour. Do you find at a lot of your weddings, or?
Yes.
Yeah, ours, it's different here. It seems like a lot of our cocktail hours, usually they're not there. It's usually like cocktail 15 minutes. It's usually not a cocktail hour. It's
Right.
more just grab a beverage before you go into the reception, or before you take your seat at your table. And usually that's when the bride and groom is kind of gone either back to their room to like freshen up, or take just like 10, 15 minutes to just relax and be away from people for a little bit, because usually it's been a lot of people on them all day, and they're tired at that point. Maybe they haven't even eaten yet, so sometimes they'll take off to go get like a quick snack, because sometimes there might be some speeches and things. They might not actually start eating until 7 o'clock or something. So I find here cocktail hour tends to be more like cocktail 15 minutes. So we don't capture a lot of that traditionally. We usually have to use those 15 minutes to get the details. So that's usually when we go into the room, photograph things like the cake, the room itself, before everybody kind of descends upon it and starts to tear apart all the nice table settings and all the details that the bride has spent thousands of hours and dollars on putting together. So we try to do all of that before everybody kind of comes into the room. It doesn't always work. Sometimes just the time of the day, we get there and people are already in the room because they don't really have a separate cocktail space, so it's just everybody goes in the room. So it varies from wedding to wedding, but that's typically what we try to do. But yeah, the cocktail hour isn't something too much that we get into covering. But I like that idea of getting kind of those headshots of people and more of those candid stuff. I'd love to do more of that, but just find here we don't do as many of those type of cocktail hours.
Well, you could do it, where you could also do it as pre-ceremony. So when the guests are seated, you're waiting for the ceremony to start. I've done a little bit of it then, but I'm usually with the bride, like I mentioned. But you could do it then. Like again, just single out people, sitting in the audience, or as people come in, people are usually smiling. They see people that they haven't seen. So that's another time that you could do that.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I usually make sure I focus on the people that are in the first 2 or 3 rows, because usually for sure those are your close family the bride and groom's close family members.
Right.
And grandparents are usually always in the first row, and so I always make a point of trying to get some nice candids of the grandparents in the front row, or just look for sweet moments between couples. Like, so I've seen really cute moments of the grandparents in the front row, and the grandpa takes the grandma's hand, and little moments like that. And the bride and groom, they love to see those candid photos of their loved ones, because oftentimes they never see them in that
And
situation.
you brought up a good point about what the grandparents, like that's something that I do too, like regardless of throughout the day. Like I really, beyond the nice portrait of grandma and grandpa, I do concentrate on grandparents as well, because the reality of it is that they're not going to be around probably for too much longer. And I've heard so many stories where the grandparents have died within sometimes weeks and 6 months after weddings. And so I really like to capture, just like you do, like I just look for that, those great they're such characters too, their faces, and capturing that moment of the grandparents, because the bride's just like you say, like, oh my gosh, you just captured my grandma, like is this how I remember her. I had a bride one time, and there's many stories like this, but she came into my studio to pick up her wedding album, and I had a screen on the studio that rotated photos, and there was this great image that's still one of my favorite grandparent images that came up of she did like a first look with her grandma
Hmm.
on the wedding day. And it's this great image of the bride and the grandma kind of like nose to nose because she went into the hotel room and like put her face up to her and they were like smiling. And so I come out, I, I, I came out to bring her book and she's sitting in my studio crying and I was like, oh.
What I
And
do?
I was like, what I do? And then she's like, I just saw that picture of my grandma and she just died like 2 weeks ago and I love that photo. And, so I think putting yourself in your client's shoes sometimes and think about this. We don't like to think about that reality, but especially with grandparents. I do it because I know how much I loved mine, and when they're gone and you don't have them around anymore. I mean, I have a picture of my grandfather that hangs right up there over my desk, and because he was so important to me. So
Yeah, and those are those moments when you hear those stories. They're heartbreaking because you hate to hear, somebody's passed away. But those are also the moments as a photographer. I know they're actually kind of rewarding because, I've had brides and grooms and couples that come and say, you photographed, took the last photograph ever of my grandfather or of my grandmother or somebody special or important to them,
right.
or the last time that they were together. So that's kind of those rewarding moments as a photographer that you go, yeah, this is why I love what I do, right? So
Right.
so yeah, cocktail hour, like I say, not as big here as it seems to be with a lot of your weddings. But then, what about the reception itself? How's kind of your night look? Is it more like, do you stop and take a break for dinner? Do you eat? That's a question that's a big difference, I think, between here in Canada versus in the States. Is kind of how that happens. I know I talk a lot about like the vendor meal, where they kind of usher you off to some separate room and you get a bag of a leftover sandwich. That seems to be common in the U.S. In Canada, we tend to go, we're invited to the dinner and included in the dinner a lot. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, depends on the venue, of course, but yeah, it seems really like I've written articles and blog posts about this, and I know pretty much our audience are photographers, so I'm preaching to the choir. But the one thing, like, I think the most important thing is that, like, we eat when the guests eat, because when the guests are done, well, first of all, when they're eating, they don't want to be photographed. And then when they're done, things are going to start to happen. But I think this generally comes from the venues, because the venues have this policy like, well, we're not going to feed your vendors until the last guest is served. But, so you're going to serve the last guest, and this is, and I'm sure every photographer listening to this goes, yep. And then they feed you, and you're like, all right, well, you have 5 minutes to eat.
Yeah.
And, we've been there. Typically, I know I've been sometimes before I get fed, 7, 8 hours, before you actually sit down. And if you think about any job, like, we should get at least a 30-minute break to sit down and eat. And, that doesn't always happen. But I think it comes from the venue. I even talked to my couples about it. I know some people have a clause in their contract about meals that, say that they should eat what the guests eat, that they're not given a crusty sandwich and this and that. I kind of understand the couple's point of view, but if the couple says, all right, well, the vendor meals are, maybe $50, but then if they give you a full meal like the rest of the guests, then you get counted in their head count at $150 a plate or whatever your wedding is. And, it costs the couple more. So I think that's where the idea of the vendor meal. Now, my opinion, if somebody wanted to be the hero, it would be the venue. And the venue would make sure that the photographers got fed everything that the guests did, and so that you'd have nothing but great things to say about that venue. Mm-hmm. Every time I work at this place, I get fed, and the venue can, boast and make it known, like, yeah, no problem, we'll feed your vendors for you. Because what does it really cost them? Even if there's a band with 10 people in a band and 2 photographers, 2 videographers, so let's say 14, 15 people, whatever. I mean, that doesn't cost them $50 a plate even. It costs them like $2 a plate.
Yeah, and inevitably people don't show up to the wedding, right? So there's always a few extra plates that.
Right. So I think venues would be smart to, sort of be the hero there.
Hmm.
Not charge the couples for vendor meals, and or a minimal charge. Like, look, we'll charge you $10. Their cost. We're going to charge you $10 for a vendor meal for each of your vendors, but we'll feed them what your guests are eating. And then the vendor kind of make it known, like, yeah, we're taking our vendors here at such and such country club or wherever you're working.
Yeah, yeah. We've never really run into it too much of an issue. Like we haven't had it to the point where we felt we had to put a clause in a contract or anything. It's usually something we talk about during the pre-wedding consult. So we meet with our couples maybe a couple weeks prior to the wedding, and that's something that we mention. We bring up to them and say, hey, we'd appreciate it if you include us in dinner. If for whatever reason you can't include us in the dinner, we totally get that. Just we'll need to take a break at some point and eat. Otherwise, if you don't want us passing out and falling down at your reception, you want to keep us fresh and fed.
Right.
So we just let them know, kind of two choices. If they're going to feed us, great. We just appreciate if they could have us, in the queue early, so that again we can eat and then get back to shooting. Because again, like you say, if you get fed at the end, which happens a lot, then your dinner comes. I've had this happen before. We're at the wedding and we're the last ones to get fed, and our plate arrives, gets on the table, and all of a sudden, like, the speeches start, and you're like, right. You're looking at your plate like, oh, I guess I'm not eating this, and then you run off, you shoot some of the speeches, and you come back, and they've cleared the table, and dinner's gone. So right. It's generally not been an issue. We did have one wedding this last year, which is very unusual because whenever we shoot at this venue, it's a really, really nice hotel in the city, and it's never been an issue before. But kind of dinner, like, our names weren't on the chart. Dinner kind of started, and we're looking around the room, and so I went over and I didn't ask the couple. I actually just went and asked the catering manager. I said, "Did they have us on the list by chance for dinner?" And the catering manager was like, "Nope, they didn't include you." So I was like, "Okay." So I had to go tell the bride and groom. I said, I kind of did it nicely, but sort of said, "It looks like we weren't included in dinner, so we're gonna have to go out and get something." But the way we pose it to our clients when we're talking about it beforehand is that if we're away from the room because we have to go eat something. Right. And if something happens, then we're not there to catch it. If we're in the room and we're eating and something happens, we're going to get up and capture it. Like, my camera's with me. You're going to get that moment. But, and usually once they see that, that's no problem. We'll include you in dinner. And
Right.
So it's usually not.
I had a similar, this was years ago, but it was the same thing. Like, we had worked a long day, and, we weren't, and I think I even, like, had to talk to the bride or something, and, I was like, is there a vendor meal for us? And she's like, I can't. She's like, I'm not feeding you guys. She's like, it's $150 a person or whatever. And I was like, but there's vendor meals. And she's like, but whatever. She was just kind of a bridezilla. And I said, well, that's fine. I understand. I said, but we've been working 10 hours, and we're gonna need to take a break. So we're gonna leave here and go run out and get some food, and we'll be back. So don't do anything while we're gone. And miraculously, we got food pretty quick.
Yeah, it's amazing how that happens. Yeah, we try to talk about that. This particular example, we didn't. I don't know. It just didn't come up during the pre-wedding discussion, because usually it's never an issue. But now that it's happened, we're going to be a little more conscious of making sure that conversation happens before the wedding, just so that we know.
Go ahead.
So, and we bring stuff. I mean, we'll bring snacks with us and stuff like that, during the day. But it's still, after you've been working 8 or 10 hours, I love that the bread. When the bread comes to the table, photographers are always like diving into the bread, and I'm sure the other people that we sit with at the table think we're crazy, but it's like it's the only thing we've eaten for the last 8 hours. Out of my way.
Well, I think, like, the simple solution, like, for those of you listening, if you've probably all been in the situation, but if you want to avoid this, you could put something in your contract, whether how aggressive you want to be or not, that says, it is customary to feed the photographers, and suggest, like we did, and it's best for us to eat when the guests eat, so that, first off, nobody are taking pictures while they're eating, and, we'll be eating while the guests are eating, so we're all ready to go once the toasts and those things start. And you could just have it as a suggestion, say it's customary too, and if you want to be a little more aggressive, then you say, we require a meal for each whatever, but that's the best way, and like Bruce said, just have the conversation, bring it up, make sure that it's all about the communication.
Yep, you don't want your photographers to get hangry.
That's right.
So then, what's the rest of the night look like for you in terms of lighting and any of that? Do you do a lot of off-camera flash work at your receptions, or do you tend to kind of go with the ambient light, or does it
Yeah, I've gone
vary?
back and forth with that over the years. I've used external lights and lit the dance floor, and these days I'm trying to keep it simple. Generally, with the nicer weddings that I do, there's a lot of pretty room light. So I'll just do a little bit of shutter drag and bring up those lights in the room. Um, I've been actually recently, since Sony brought out the A7S, which is their high ISO camera, and also has silent shutter on it, which is really great, especially for ceremony and toasts and things like that, where you don't want to be disturbing them. I mean, you literally cannot hear the shutter go. But the high ISO, where I'll tend to shoot available light for a majority of the reception, and I'll have my second photographer shoot flash, so we kind of have a little bit of both, and it's kind of a nice mix. So, for instance, during cake, they're shooting the camera with flash, and I'm just shooting available light. So I generally have very nice lighting at my wedding, so it really is conducive to doing that. You just have to kind of see. And then a lot of times if I am shooting flash, I I'll bounce the light a lot, sometimes, just to give a little bit of dimension to the lighting instead of like direct on camera. But on the dance floor, I'll shoot it direct. Again, I just kind of on the dance floor, again, I want it focused and lit well. I want to see their faces, and I'll play around with my shutter speeds and shutter drag to pull up ambient light in the background, or sometimes if they have, like the wedding I just did this last Saturday, they had like these colorful rings on that blink different colors, so I slowed down my shutter speed and lowered my flash a little bit so that I could pick up some of the movement of their hands when they were dancing. The flash will freeze them, but a little bit longer of an exposure, like a 15th of a second or a 10th of a second, I was getting some movement with their ring. So I like to show a little movement in dancing for some of it, but not all of it, because sometimes the clients don't get that.
Yeah,
So you got to show a little creativity, but you can't do it all night, because they'll be, why are all these pictures out of focus? So
yeah.
if you mix it up a little bit, and give them a variety, when it's appropriate.
Yeah, for a while there we had well, I still have it. I don't use it very much. We have a fisheye lens. Sometimes I'll pull that out, and do a few, the dance floor kind of stuff with a fisheye lens. But again, I'm not going to shoot the whole thing with a fisheye lens because nobody wants that. But yeah, I find the reception, particularly the dance part's kind of that time when you can play a little bit, experiment a little bit, do some things like a slow shutter, shutter drag, or even like twist your camera to kind of get the lights, kind of blurring, but hit them with some flash to freeze the subject. Those are some times, when you can experiment a little bit, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
We tend to, I guess, bring more lighting. That's something that we're kind of known for is bringing our off-camera flash. And actually, when I second shoot, there's a few other photographers that I second shoot with, and they actually bring me along specifically for that skill, is being able to light things with off-camera flash, because a lot of them are more natural light photographers. They're not as comfortable with the off-camera flash. But we get into some venues here that are less than pretty. That's a nice way to put it.
Right.
They're fugly, and you need some, and it depends. Again, that's a good thing to ask your couple ahead of time. What are they doing for the light? Are they bringing in? Are they going to have uplighting and nice lighting, or is it just whatever's there in the venue? And you get to know these venues after a little while. There's a couple of venues here in town that are like dark, and if they don't light it, then it's going to look pretty horrible. Right. So we'll bring our off-camera lights. So we use these. I was using the Canon speed lights for the first couple of years, and what I found with the Canon speed lights is that they're great, but their recycle time just wasn't fast enough for certain things that were happening, like bouquet toss, like certain things that were really fast moving. So I've actually moved now. We're using these bare bulb flashes from Godox. They're very similar to the Quantums, if you're familiar with the Quantum bare bulb flashes, but these ones are about half the price, and really, really nice quality of light, but they're super powerful. They're about 8 times more power output than my Canon speed lights. So what I find is we can set these things up, run them at a 30-second power. They're just manual flash, so I can run them at 32nd or 16th power, and they recycle really, really fast. So they're really good for like fast-moving action. Did you get a chance to look at WPPI? They had those new ProPhoto B2 lights.
Yeah. I actually really like those lights. I was inquiring about them Um, so I'm like looking into that. But then somebody was saying that I think they're only for Canon and Nikon. I don't know if they work with the Sony cameras.
Well, as far like the TTL stuff, maybe, but you probably could still run them in a manual mode, I bet,
Right.
with the Sonys. But yeah, they looked really nice. They're not cheap. They're like almost pro photo lights. They're very expensive.
Right.
I think
Yeah, I looked into that. Like there's a single kit, and then there's a two light kit. I think one's 2100, and the other one's like 28 if you get the second light.
yeah, in Canada here they were $3,000 for the single light. So that's one light.
Yeah.
So it starts to add up after a while. But so I found these Godox lights, or Cheetah is another brand, or Newer. They're all the same light, but they're a bare bulb flash, and they work really, really well. So we've got 3 of those, and we'll set those up around the room. And then I'll still have an on-camera flash that I might pull out and do, on the dance floor if our off-camera light isn't if we can't get it where we want it. Because sometimes we're restricted a little bit in where we can put it, and then you're dealing with stands, and then you've got things that guests can trip over and stuff. So sometimes you have to take those things into consideration, when you're setting up your off-camera flash. One thing I bought when I was at WPPI, I was a good boy. I didn't shop too much at the expo, but I did buy Jerry Gionis's version 2 of the Ice Light for shooting the details. Have you had a chance to see that before? Or it kind of looks like a lightsaber.
Yeah. I've seen one. As a matter of fact, the photographer I worked with this last weekend had one, and I've never used it. I liked it, but I have a GL1 gun light.
Oh, right, the Lowell.
Sort of like a trigger, right?
Yeah.
Trigger light. I really like that because it's like a spot. I can use it. I can use it for detail if I want, which a lot of times we'll do. We'll paint with it, do some long exposure and paint some of the centerpieces, or I'll use it for first dance, kind of spotlight my couple depending on what the lighting's like in the room, or backlight them. So it's not a cheap light, but I really like it.
Yeah, I saw them. I checked those out as well. They're about $700 or $800, and it looks like a drill, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and they were pretty cool. Like they could throw the light pretty far, and again, you can just look up the Lowell. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. But yeah, so I picked up the new version of Jerry Gionis's Ice Light, and it's basically an LED light. It looks like a lightsaber, and again, great for details, centerpieces, that kind of stuff. So it's like a constant.
What did they upgrade? What's new about it?
So it's 50% brighter than the first version, so a little more powerful. They reconfigured the buttons on it because I guess the previous buttons were kind of confusing and not the most intuitive. And then you can now replace the battery on it. So the other one, I think the battery couldn't come out, so you had to keep the unit plugged in if you had to recharge it. Now you can actually purchase a spare battery.
Oh, got it.
So you could run it, and then if your battery ran out, you just swap the battery out, and take the battery and plug it in. So they did those. So I picked one of those up. I haven't got it yet. It's supposed to ship soon, and actually it works really good as a video light as well for podcasting because you can mount it and actually have it. So I might hopefully I get it in time for next show, and I can mount it above me, and maybe I'll have. I don't know if it'll make me look prettier, or I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, there's no amount of Photoshop in the world that can make me look prettier. So, but that tends to be our approach on the receptions for sure. Is we like to light them, so we bring in our lighting gear with us, and find that system works really well. Their battery pack, really small battery packs, similar to those new ProPhoto B2s. They take a little battery pack, but the battery life on them is great. We can get through 2 weddings before we have to, charge them up, which is awesome. I usually top them up before every wedding, but I could get through a couple of weddings easily on these. They're really, really good. But the big thing for us is just the recycle time on them is really quick, so it works great. So both me and my wife shoot off them, so we'll be both just bang, 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 bang on these lights, and they just keep going all night. So they're really, really good lights. Very happy with those. How about the exit? What do you do? Do you find you are there when the couples leave, or do you leave and the couples are still enjoying the party, or do you do sparkler exits with your couples?
Yeah, of course I've done them. As a matter of fact, I just did one this weekend. The way I do my timing is I say up to 10 hours. Excuse me. Up to 10 hours on the wedding day. So if the sparkler exits, at the 12th hour, they're like, yeah, we want you to stay and shoot the sparkler exit. It's at 2 in the morning when we leave. then I will sort of say, well, if you want to pay me the 10 hours, but generally, or for the overtime, but generally, I'm pretty flexible about that as long as you know it makes sense. I started, for instance, this last weekend. I started getting ready pictures at 2, and the wedding was scheduled to be done at 11. So I was fine, and they said, "Oh, we're gonna stay half an hour longer." So I was like, "Okay," like to make them happy. I wasn't gonna be a stickler about that, but I mean, it's a great shot. I mean, now once you've done it a couple times, you're like, "Okay, well, just another sparkler shot." But again, I think the most important thing is we've done hundreds of these weddings, and our couples have only got married one time, so you have to kind of keep that in mind that it's their first wedding, and you got to get rid of that little curmudgeon attitude, like, oh
Yep.
my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, and for those of you that, work on an hourly, then it is an opportunity. Like, all right, well, you want me to stay half an hour, you're going to make a little extra money for doing so.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, we always again check in with our bride and groom about a half an hour or so before before we're scheduled to depart. So again, a lot of our packages are based around a number of hours that they book us for. So if we're there for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever time that is, usually about a half an hour before, we just remind them, say, hey guys, just a reminder, we're done at 9 or 9:30 or 10 o'clock, whatever the time is. Is there anything you need, you want us to capture that we haven't captured? Or are there any people here that we didn't get a photograph of you with? We kind of try to plant that seed about a half an hour beforehand, because if we go up to them when we're leaving and say, okay, we're done for the night, that's invariably they're going to say, oh wait, we got to get this photo. So we usually try to say about a half an hour beforehand, plant the seed, okay, and sometimes they're running behind. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we haven't done our first dance yet, or we haven't done the cake cut, or whatever it is. And then they'll usually speed up their timetable a little bit to make sure that gets done before we leave, unless they're fine with paying the extra time and having us stay longer. Then that's a discussion that we have. But we usually try to catch them and grab them about a half an hour, 45 minutes kind of beforehand, and usually sometimes we'll use the rings as an excuse. So we'll try to grab their rings from them at that point to go do ring shots, and then when we bring the rings back, we'll kind of remind them that, hey, we've got about half an hour, 45 minutes left. Here's what we have on our schedule for whatever's left on the schedule, and then find out from them, is there anything else? And then once it's done, of course, we make sure to say goodbye to our bride and groom. If we can find and track down the parents, I always like to say goodbye to the parents as well, and thank them, because often, sometimes they're involved, sometimes they've paid for it, or helped pay for it. And then the bridal party too. Like if they're nearby, we'll try and say our goodbyes to the bridal party as well, because that's where your referrals come from. That's where your future weddings hopefully come from. Right. And if they had a good time with you, and they remembered that they had a good time with you, chances are pretty good that if they're getting married, or they know somebody getting married, they're much more likely to probably recommend you.
Right. No, those are great tips. I do the same thing.
Yeah. How about slideshows? Before we kind of wrap, I know we kind of at the end of the night, before we kind of wrap it up, do you do slideshows, same day kind of slideshows at the reception, or?
I don't. I mean, in the past, back in the day, like maybe I'd do a quick pick some pictures that I like and put them on the laptop and set them by the bar or something and let people see them. Generally, with the type of clientele that I have, they don't want that. So I sort of have to play that by ear, but it's a lot of extra work, I think. So I don't, more or less.
Yeah, we don't either. I know when the iPad first came out, I kind of was experimenting a little bit with that, of bringing the iPad with us, and then picking a few images and transferring a few images. But it's like with the cameras that we shoot, the Canon cameras, they don't have any kind of Wi-Fi built into them. It's not particularly easy, or it should be a lot easier than it is, but it's not. So you need some way. Then you got to get the card out, and I mean, we're usually pretty rushed and short on time anyway. So to kind of do all that, it takes some time. If you've got it, I think, in your schedule, and you've got the time to work with. I've heard really good results from photographers who have done it, that have set up a same day kind of slideshow and set it up by the bar, and they said it's led to some really good referrals and people calling them. So if you want to do it, I think it can be worthwhile, but you do have to make sure you
do about it.
Yeah, you have to accommodate for it, and even maybe have a second there that's second person that's their job, is to get some of the files off, do a little quick edit on them, put a little slideshow together of 10, 20 images. So
yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think that kind of brings us to the parting is such sweet sorrow. That brings us to the end of the wedding day, I think so, and probably the end of another episode. So, I guess to kind of wrap things up, we want to remind you guys if you want to learn more about us or any of the links that we talked about, you can head over to the blog post that will accompany this episode, and you'll find that at thisweekinphoto.com/weddings. Or you can also subscribe to the show on iTunes if you go over there. And remember to also follow us on Instagram. We're going to try and get some photos. I took a couple photos at WPPI, so I'm going to try and get those up on Instagram as well. I think I got you in action at the Sony booth, Robert. So I'll try and post those up on the Instagram account. Okay. And as I always, send your questions as well for the show at TWiPwed@thisweekinphoto.com. So, Mr. Evans, what are you up to, and where can people find you online? Do you have anything coming up that people should know about, and where can they find you?
Well, I told you I just got back, and I've been sick, and so trying to get better, but I leave tomorrow to go do one of my super secret weddings. So next episode, I will tell you who and what.
Ooh.
And
Can I guess? Is it Taylor Swift?
No, it's not Taylor Swift. I wish. That's one of my goals. If she gets married someday, I need to do her wedding.
Can I second shoot with you?
Yeah, you and my daughter, and I'm sure I have a few other volunteers.
So Taylor, if you're listening.
Yeah, Taylor Swift. Robert Evans needs to shoot your wedding.
Yeah, and Bruce Clark needs to assist.
So yeah, getting ready to leave to go do that. And then I'm busy the next couple months, just a lot of traveling back and forth. New York. Where else am I going to be? Arizona. I have another job, destination wedding at the beginning of April, which will be fun. So yeah, I'm busy the next couple months. But if you want to follow me, find me, write me. If it's show related, of course, write me through the TWiP show. But my website is robertevans.com. Instagram is @RobertEvans. Twitter is @RobertEvans. And Facebook is Robert Evans Studios.
Excellent. Fantastic. And if you are looking for me, you can find me online at momentsindigital.com. And if you're looking for me on the social networks, Instagram, Twitter, all the usual suspects, you'll find me at Bruce Clark, and Clark has an E at the end. And again, we want to remind you, just visit our website at thisweekinphoto.com and go to the weddings section and check us out. Well, thanks again for listening to another episode of TWiP Weddings, raising the bar one wedding at a time.